guys. How are ya? So happy to connect today. So, I'm Robert Mack. I'm going to talk a little bit today about love and about loneliness and dating relationships as well, but relationships of all kind. Of course, relationships that we have with others, but also the relationship that we have with ourselves, right? And so, today I'm going to start first by just sort of introducing me and sort of why this is a topic of interest to me personally and professionally. As you may know, I'm a positive psychology expert. I'm an author and I'm an executive coach. And I got into this work the hard way. I think I've learned most things the hard way my entire life. I got into the space of positive psychology, which is the science really of well-being. It's the science of what makes life worth living. I found positive psychology, which is a master's program at the University of Pennsylvania, after a very long life of being deeply, truly miserable, unhappy, and deeply lonely. I grew up in an incredible family. I had great health. I did pretty well academically and athletically, but over a period of time, I became increasingly depressed. And I remember being depressed as long as I remember being alive, quite frankly, maybe 6 or 7 years of age. And I always thought I would grow out of that depression. It did not happen. I did not grow out of that depression, certainly not right away. And that sense of depression and self-loathing and self-hate that I had when I was probably 6 or 7 years old only got worse as I got older and as I seemed to do better academically, athletically. I always felt deeply alone. More than that, I felt truly lonely. I felt that no one understood me. They certainly couldn't or wouldn't be able to understand my loneliness and my depression. And it eventually led me to a place where I seriously contemplated and then decided that I would kill myself. And so I remember researching the means and methods to do that. I didn't have access to a lot of means and methods. I didn't have a gun. I didn't want to throw myself off a bridge. And there were some means and methods that I did have access to, but they felt really violent. And I didn't care for the violence. I just wanted it to end. I just wanted the loneliness to end. I wanted the depression to end. I wanted the suicidal ideation to end. And at that point, I was experiencing the suicidal ideation and really wishing that I had never been born. I was thinking about that and feeling that more than I was thinking about or feeling anything else ever. So no matter what I was up to, whether it was hanging out with somebody or whether it was working or whether it was working out, I ultimately felt like it was all pointless and I would never really feel connected to anyone in the world. So in any case, I had a moment and I went to the kitchen, decided to get a kitchen knife. I rammed it into my wrist, mostly because I was concerned about the pain. As much as you may want to kill yourself, at the end of the day, the point is to not experience more pain. It's to end the pain. And so in any case, I had a very strange and unexpected and unpredictable experience at that moment when I suddenly, for no good reason, despite things on the inside, or I should say things on the outside not changing, everything on the inside seemed to change in that moment because I felt for the first time in my life, deeply, truly at peace. I felt happy to be alive. And I felt a sense of well-being and bliss wash over me that was inexplicable and ineffable. I couldn't put words to it really, and I didn't understand it a whole lot. I understood enough to know that I should probably postpone this suicide thing though, that if I could look into what that experience was that allowed me to feel differently despite my life not changing in terms of the objective conditions, circumstances of my life, that maybe this suicide thing I didn't need to execute against that. Maybe I could find a better way and maybe I could even live happily. Now that was a very tall, ambitious idea at the time. And quite frankly, I only committed to about an hour of not killing myself. And even that I wasn't fully committed to. Maybe, honestly, it was probably about, I don't know, I said I'd do 5 minutes of research. And so in that period of time, however, I started finding and discovering lots and lots of fantastic data and science that let me know first and foremost that I wasn't alone. And as I continued to dig and dive deeper into the research, I read a lot of stories about a lot of people that had felt exactly the way I had felt in terms of being lonely and isolated, feeling misunderstood or not understood at all, deeply depressed, beyond dysphoria, and who had even contemplated and maybe like me, gone further and done something around the suicide, right? Or something to complete or execute against the suicide. So in any case, it was over 2 decades ago. And the entire time, all I really did was research and apply everything humanly possible to solve for loneliness and depression and to become essentially a happy person. And I learned a lot. Lots of the things that I tried did not work so well. Lots of the things that I tried worked really well. It was always 2 steps forward and it felt like 20 steps back. I experienced or continued to experience a suicidal ideation for, quite frankly, at least a few years after I had that sort of suicidal moment. And I would say that in time, however, I experienced less and less of it. And especially as I started to zone in or dial in on specific practices that really worked for me, I discovered that I was having fewer suicidal thoughts. And when they would occur or surface, they would sort of stay or visit for a shorter period of time, and it would be less intense. And then I remember eventually getting to a place where I'd realized I hadn't thought about suicide or I felt that I wanted to kill myself for at least a full day straight. And then next thing I know, it was a week, and then before now that I look back, it's probably, it's 2 decades, right? And so today I want to talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, I want to talk to you guys about what matters most to you. And I think it's love, right? I think we're all looking for love. We're looking for love everywhere and within everybody. And we're looking for love, probably most of us, in lots of the wrong places and lots of the wrong people, right? And that's the challenge and the opportunity, I think, for most of us, is that there's a very real but erroneous and flawed premise that what we seek and what we need and what we want is within somebody else and is at some other place or at some other time, that it's somehow outside of us, right? And so I want to sort of debunk that. But first, I'm going to start with just a little bit of research, because I know for me, the research helps a great deal. When I was going through my very depressed and lonely sort of experiences, I found solace in science, right? Eventually, I came around to appreciating a lot of the spiritual stuff and a lot of the religious stuff and poets and philosophers and all that good stuff. But it was the science that really helped me trust and have faith that there were answers that existed out there in the world and that people were applying them and using them, right? So the first thing I want to say to you is this, is that what we found through this Ivy League science of positive psychology is that if you're looking for a key to finding love, right? Let's just talk about in traditional ways. You want a relationship. Maybe you want a romantic relationship. Maybe you want many romantic relationships. Maybe you want friendships, right? You want to get along with people better, or you want to have people enjoy your company more or invite you out to more events or just contact you more. The one thing that we know for sure, without question, after decades of research, is that happiness is a master key to attracting more people and to enjoying more people and having more people enjoy us. Happiness. Now that sounds like in some ways probably such a cliche, but it's true that happiness is attractive, like literally attractive and figuratively attractive. And so what do I mean by that? Well, first and foremost, happy people are rated as more attractive than unhappy people. Now, here's how they determined that. They've done studies. They've taken the 2 pictures of the same person, right? They've taken one picture, the person is smiling, an authentic smile. We call that a Duchenne smile. You can't fake it. In the other picture, the person is frowning, or they're just looking very blank, maybe at the screen. And everybody who looks at those 2 pictures, for the most part, says, my goodness, the one where they're smiling, well, they're definitely more attractive. They're more. And so we know that happiness is attractive in that way. Beyond that, right? Beyond that, we also know that happy people, as opposed to unhappy people, get married earlier, stay married longer, and are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not, right? So happiness, again, is attractive, literally attractive. And so the challenge then and the opportunity becomes, well, if I want to be in a loving relationship and I want to be in a happy relationship, I've got to find a way to be happy alone first, right? I've got to find a way to be happy without a partner to attract a happy partner, right? So I'll say that again. I got to find a way to be happy without a partner in order to attract a happy partner. Now, lots of us can attract a lot of partners and we attract a lot of people, but if they're not happy people, they're going to make our problems even more problematic, right? They're only going to add to our problems. They're only going to multiply the problems that we already have. Life is difficult enough. We don't need additional problems that unhappy people add to our lives, right? We can be unhappy alone, right? So the challenge then, the opportunity is, how can we be happy alone so that we can be happy together with someone, right? So it's aloneness that we're literally coming around to understanding and realizing. We must find a way to enjoy, right? So the question is, how can we enjoy our own company more so that somebody else can enjoy our company? Because if we can't enjoy our company, how can we ask anybody else in the whole world to enjoy what we can't enjoy? If you can't love your own company, how can you ask someone else to do what you're not willing to do or what you haven't done, right? And so in order to be happy together, we've got to find a way to be happy alone, right? And so a happy person is a person who's happy even when, and especially when, they're left alone with nothing but their own thoughts to keep them company, right? And so it's a question of how do we increasingly come around to enjoying our aloneness so that we're prepared for being happy together with someone else, right? And so here's where I want to make a little delineation here. So lots of us experience loneliness over the course of our lives. We know that loneliness is actually it's a public health epidemic, right? It's become that serious. And this whole coronavirus COVID thing has made loneliness a much more pressing issue than it was even previously, right? So just prior to the pandemic, we had about 30% of people that felt somewhat lonely or chronically lonely over time. There are essentially two kinds of loneliness. There's chronic loneliness, where you consistently feel lonely, but there's also situational loneliness, right? Where you've just broken up with somebody, you just lost a loved one, maybe you just moved or you just lost a job. But situational loneliness, chronic loneliness, there are some differences, but at the end of the day, loneliness is loneliness, right? And it feels the same. The DSM-5, right? The diagnostic manual, essentially, for mental health and mental awareness, right? Doesn't have a designation for loneliness, but it does have a designation for something that's called social isolation, right? Social isolation is objective isolation. So it means essentially being alone. You don't have that many social connections or whatnot. But the interesting thing is that loneliness is really the subjective experience of that social isolation, right? And so by subjective, we mean that you can be alone, but not feel lonely, right? You can be and feel lonely, but not be alone. So we've all felt lonely sometimes in a crowd. And then there are other moments where we feel not alone, but we're perfectly not lonely, but we're very much alone, right? And so aloneness and loneliness are two entirely different things. Yes, there is a correlation somewhat, but for the most part, loneliness and aloneness are different things, right? So we know we can be lonely in the crowd, and we can also feel loved all by ourselves. And so really at the end of the day, as much as we want to sort of project our loneliness and our sadness or depression on something or somebody else, that's really never the case. The case is that we're having trouble just relating with ourselves, right? And the better we relate with ourselves, the better we can relate with other people. So this is how big of a problem loneliness is in the world. So loneliness, the subjective experience of social isolation, right? Again, remember, it's inside. This social isolation, subjective experience of that, which we call loneliness, has the deleterious or detrimental effect on your health that smoking 15 cigarettes a day does, right? So loneliness, the experience of loneliness, is associated with increased anxiety, depression, heart disease, dementia, cognitive decline, obesity. In fact, loneliness is such a serious and detrimental experience and condition that it increases the odds of dying by 30%, right? It's that intense. And it's so important, in fact, that the UK has now a minister of loneliness that they've assigned or appointed, right? They have a minister of loneliness, and so they're taking it that seriously. So let's talk about this for a second. I'm going to try and keep this as simple and as pithy, as punchy as possible. At the end of the day, loneliness is a number of things, but I'm going to make a very strong case for loneliness simply being lonely thoughts. It's just lonely thoughts, okay? Loneliness is lonely thoughts. A feeling or experience of lovelessness is simply at the very core or root of it, it's thoughts of loneliness or thoughts of lovelessness, right? So lovelessness is loveless thoughts. Loneliness is lonely thoughts. Unhappiness essentially is unhappy thoughts, right? We're going to go beyond this, but I just want to start there, right? So the challenge and the opportunity then is, how can we learn to embrace our aloneness? You know, of course, that doesn't mean that for a second we don't reach out to other people, that we don't connect with people when we can, but how can we enjoy our aloneness and embrace it so that we can love ourselves and our company so much that all that's really left of this loneliness is pure love, right? And I would argue that the first step really is coming to understand that the loneliness, as much as it seems like it's something about the world or it's something about other people, it's really something about us, right? And it's our lack of practice in terms of disciplining our mind, right? At the end of the day, we feel lonely or we feel unhappy in a chronic way just because we've practiced thinking in lonely ways. We've practiced thinking in unhappy ways. And so it's often an undisciplined mind that leads to these states that are uncomfortable or unhappy. There's something built into the brain, and you might already be aware of this, called a negativity bias, right? And it's there for a good reason. The negativity bias essentially is that it's the finding discovery that the problem will mostly get your attention, the problems in the world. And your brain works very much like the century of a ship. Its entire job is to solve problems. That's what it does, and it does it extraordinarily well, okay? But what that means is when you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? When you only have a brain or a mind, everything looks like a problem to be solved, okay? So the mind intentionally and almost exclusively goes searching for problems to solve, right? And so it's got this negativity bias built in where it's always seeking and searching for problems to solve. It works like the century of a ship. The century of a ship looks out into the horizon and scans for problems until it finds one to solve, and then it works on solving it, right? Now, because we have this negativity bias in the brain, it takes us some effort and practice to begin to reframe our lives, ourselves, and the way that we experience life so that it's an increasingly positive and happy and love-filled experience of life. Science has found, neuroplasticity research has found that if you can practice thinking, okay, and connecting with people and living your life in ways that are increasingly positive, that if you can keep it up for 66 days, you literally begin to rewire your brain for an experience that is more loving, that is more positive, that is happier, that is more peaceful. And it leads to an experience where that's increasingly effortless, right? So in the beginning, it's effortful, but that effort leads to it becoming effortless, right? And so everything is hard in the beginning until it gets easy, right? It was hard to walk at first. If you remember just crawling around as a baby, you probably don't remember. I barely, don't really remember. I just remember seeing pictures. But with practice, you eventually learn to walk. And then before you know it, you're doing more than that. You're running, and then you're sprinting, right? And so the challenge and the opportunity is that in the beginning, it's a little difficult. So let's break this down a little. So I'm going to say it and summarize it in a way that makes the most sense for me. And that is, at the end of the day, happiness is the master key to love, okay? And the key to happiness is presence. We could also call it self-love. A lot of these words really are synonymous, okay? Love always starts with self-love, and there's no way of getting around that, right? So if you try and do like I've done, and you go out into the world and you try to love people, or you try to get people to love you, and you genuinely don't love yourself, you find that you don't believe them, you don't trust them. How could they possibly love you? You know yourself better than them. You're ugly, or you're not very smart, or you're not very accomplished, or you're overweight, or you're underweight, or whatever the case may be. And so you can't receive love, right? You literally don't feel lovable, love-able, meaning you can't receive it, but you also can't give it. Because when you give it, there's always an expectation of reciprocity, right? So you give it with strings attached. And in my experience and how I feel deeply on the inside is that it's not love if it comes with an expectation of reciprocity or reward, right? That is not love. I just call that a bargain. That's a negotiation. That's a business affair, right? That's politics. That's politics. So if we're wanting to both give love and receive love in a way that feels purely good for us and good for the other person, it's got to be without expectations, right? It's freely given and freely received, right? Without an expectation of reciprocity. If it's not free, it's not love, right? If it's not freedom, it's not love. It might be lust, it might be entertainment, it might be distraction, it might be a number of things, but it's a needy, desperate pseudo love, right? I'd call it false love. The psychologists call it probably, pseudo love. And so happiness is the master key to love. Presence, or self-love, we'll call it the same thing, and I'll explain why, is the master key to happiness. What is happiness essentially? In the beginning of our journey, okay, most of us find that or feel that happiness really is about doing happy things, right? It's like, okay, I'll either acquire happy things, desirable objects, desirable people, or I'll find happy things to do. I'll take the skydiving trip. I'll have, more sex. I'll drink more, whatever it is, you think that it's happy activities. And that's partly true. We certainly prefer happier or more desirable activities over activities that are uncomfortable or painful, right? But you at some point graduate from this idea that happiness is just what you do. So much more than that, because you can find yourself doing things that would generally or have consistently or historically brought you happiness, but all of a sudden they don't anymore, right? It's like, what happened? How come I'm not enjoying this party the way I normally do? Or why am I not enjoying the drinking? Or why am I not enjoying, this person the way I normally do? So in the beginning, you think it's about what you do. Over time, you graduate to a level when you realize that happiness is not what you do. It's not what you have. It's not what you achieve, accomplish, or acquire. Happiness is a state of mind, right? So when I wrote Happiness from the Inside Out, like 10 years ago or longer, I started really, that's where I was in my life. It was happiness is a state of mind. And so I can practice thinking happier thoughts. And so part of the challenge and opportunity here for us, knowing that we want to shore up this loneliness thing or solve for this loneliness thing, and we also want to attract more people and find or discover that more people are attracted to us, we want to get along with people more easily, is to begin telling a better feeling or happier story about ourselves and our lives based in truth, right? And so instead of it being, oh my gosh, I'm so alone and nobody understands me, that's one option, one way of saying it. You could just as easily and just as truthfully say, the opportunity for me to be happy is greater than it's ever been. The opportunity for me to be or feel love is greater than it's ever been. So when you're at your absolute worst moment in your life and you're feeling the most lonely that you've ever felt, really the only place to go is up, right? The only place to go from there is forward. And so you can either talk about it from a negative perspective and talk about the ways in which you're experiencing the worst depression or unhappiness ever, or you can talk about it in terms of being the greatest opportunity for happiness and for love ever, right? And it seems like such a semantic thing in the beginning, and it's not easy in the beginning because most of us get some kind of cheap thrill out of the pity. At least it feels closer to love than just indifference, right? So if we can have, if people will feel a little sad for us, or a little sorry for us, that does feel better than being completely ignored, right? Or people finding or being indifferent towards us, right? And so that's the second level, right? So the first level is we choose to do things that make us or help us feel less unhappy and less lonely. You can call that really the identification of happiness islands or love islands. So I don't know if anybody saw like Love Boat back in the day, or you saw Love Island, where there's an island full of people and they're all wanting to essentially hook up and hopefully find love. We can create this same experience for yourself by just creating a list of activities, of people, places, things that allow you to easily and effortlessly feel more love, okay? Either feel more loved or just feel more loving, right? And so that's the happiness is what we, or happiness and love is what we do kind of experience. The more you do that, remember that the more you can begin to ratchet up or ramp up your happiness, your subjective well-being, call it peace, your self-love, all synonyms, the more attractive you become to everybody else in the world, okay? Both in terms of platonic relationships, professional relationships, personal relationships, romantic relationships, all of that, okay? So happiness is what you do. Create the happiness islands list, the love islands list, and find ways to do more of the things that are on that happiness islands or love islands list. Okay, that is like the most important place to start, without question, because the other two parts are going to be a little bit more nuanced. Okay, that's the happiness is what you do. Then you move into the happiness is what I think, or happiness is a state of mind experience, right? And that's all about telling a better feeling story about everything and everybody all the time, and doing it just simply to feel better, right? So you do it with yourself, but you also do it in conversations. And there are people out in the world, probably people like me 20 years ago, that will do everything humanly possible to get you focused back on everything that's wrong, that you should be scared of, that you should be fearful of, the things that are not going well. And your job, part of your job, is to model for them. Don't tell them how to do it. You model for them how to tell a better feeling story based in truth about whatever it is that you're talking about, right? You want to practice that with yourself and with the other person. And the whole point is so that you feel good. You're not trying to be a teacher. You're not trying to get them to change. I've been in the people change business for 20 years. And quite frankly, it can be a little underwhelming how many people really are interested in change, right? Like I thought I got into people change business. I realized that's not what I do, right? I hold space for people. And if they change, great for them. And if they don't, great for them, right? So that's the second level. First level is happiness islands, love islands. Second level is beginning to tell a better feeling story based in truth about everything. Now that's a bit of an art. It's a science, but it's a bit of an art. In the beginning, it might sound like this. Wow, John, thank you so much for sharing what you just shared. It's so interesting. I can see it that way totally, and I empathize with you. You know what I love most about what you said? And that's where you segue into the next, right, more positive, solution-oriented theme, right? So they might say, oh my goodness, this COVID thing is so scary, or I feel so alone, or don't you feel alone? You say, my goodness, absolutely. That resonates with me as much as anything. And what I love about that is right now in this moment, I feel connected to you, and I feel connected to you around this loneliness thing. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? We could have a conversation about loneliness, but somehow feel more connected as a result of that, right? So you find little phrases that become your catchphrases that you use with yourself and other people, like what I most love, or what I most love about what you said, or what I'm most looking forward to, right? It's just something simple like people say, oh my gosh, this pandemic, this quarantine, the economic, all this. And you say, I'm really looking forward to all this coming to an end. I'm really looking forward to getting back out into my life again, right? It doesn't feel that way. So you find these little statements. Another little catchphrase that you can use with yourself or other people is, my favorite part about that is, right? My favorite part about that is. And you just find these little catchphrases and they become almost your mantras. And it's the way that you segue that conversation into something that feels better. Because the truth is this, no matter what you want in your life, money, success, health, love, kids, doesn't matter what you want. You only want it because you think you'll feel better for having it. We're all ultimately after a feeling. That's only what we're after, is a feeling. So no matter what you want, or no matter what you think you want, what you really want is an experience of happiness, right? We might call it love. You can call it a compliment, call it anything you want. But at the end of the day, you're really just wanting to feel better. We all want that. We all share that, all of the whole world, right? So remember that that's your goal. It's not just the relationship. Yeah, it's great if the relationship works out. It's great if people see things your way. It's great if you make the money and you get great health again. But really, is any of that worth anything if you feel crappy inside, if you feel unhappy inside, if you still feel lonely? It's useless. It's perfectly worthless, right? You can feel unhappy and lonely and dissatisfied without all the hard work that goes into achieving, acquiring, accomplishing things, right? But you could also feel perfectly satisfied, content, and blissful and peaceful, and you can feel love also without all the hard work and the effort that most of us are accustomed to. You don't have to route this love thing, you don't have to route this happiness thing through other people and other things, okay? In fact, I would encourage you not to go straight for the source for it. I'm a lazy person. I'm going to tell you now, nobody would call me lazy, but I'm extraordinarily lazy. I believe in lazy intelligence, and I'm going to go directly to the source for anything that I need. I don't want to have to wait for it. I'm impatient. I'm going to go straight to the source for it. So everything I'm sharing today is an attempt to convince you, encourage you to go directly to the source for what you need, no matter what you need. And that source is you. You're infinitely powerful. You're infinitely abundant. But there has to be an experiential realization around that. And you can only discover that if you dive deep inside, right? So speaking of inside, and it's going to bring us to the third piece, right? So the first piece, create those happiness or love islands, okay? Those activities, people, places that you love, that make you feel uplifted, make you feel alive with very little time, energy, or effort. And that's the key. If it takes you 4 days to ramp up for something that's going to give you 4 minutes of pleasure, poor ROI, right? We don't want that ROI, right? We want something that's very easy and effortless almost, okay? So you create this love island list, this happiness island list. One quick tip, do that when you're not feeling negative or depressed if you can help it, right? So sometimes first thing in the morning is the best time you might find, or some other people find last thing at night because they're about to go to sleep, so they feel like they can put their problems aside. But try to do it when you're feeling, or you're at a place of emotional neutrality or above. So if you're feeling some level of well-being or peace or above, okay? Second thing, telling better feeling stories based in truth. Pick up a couple catchphrases, maybe a mantra or two that you use with people. They'll kind of come to realize and or expect them from you. And that in and of itself becomes a way of connecting with people. One of the other ones that I use quite often, but I've noticed that not too many people have picked up on it yet, which is just simply, oh, I love you very much. And they usually know something about to come that they probably maybe don't want to hear necessarily. But I say it in the most positive, kind, loving way that I can. But it's usually like, I love you very much, and I see you shining in greater ways, or I see you experiencing more happiness than that, or whatever. It's okay. So those are the first two steps. Doing happy things, thinking happy thoughts, or doing loving things, things that you love, and thinking increasingly loving thoughts. Third part, okay? And now if you really wanted and you could. And I have a very strong sense if you guys are, Omstars yoga fans and everything, you probably already hear at this third step. So you can skip the first two. And that is simply this. So happiness is not what you do. Love is not what you do. Happiness is not what you think. Love is not what you think. And I mean that quite literally, right? So this leads to the third one, which is happiness is not a state of mind, it's a state of being, okay? And that means that you can experience this state of being that is happiness and love by thinking less, not more, okay? Ultimately, at the end of the day, the greatest discovery of my life is that everything I've been doing, not that it's been for naught, but it's been the hard way to discover the happiness and the love that I essentially and truly am, right? Now, this happiness and love that you are, at first sounds like a spiritual platitude or a cliche. It is not, I promise you, okay? The challenge and the opportunity for most of us is to spend enough time sinking into, melting into, merging into, surrendering into, resting, relaxing into your true self. It's a silent, still, sacred, spiritual self that's thoughtless and wordless, faceless and formless, infinite and eternal, okay? We can just all call it presence. That presence, okay, is essentially what you are. It's more like life energy, and it's more a feeling and experience of peaceful aliveness in your body. So even right now, you can probably feel inside your hands, inside your feet, there's almost a vibration in there. You can feel the energy, right? Can you feel the energy in there? So barely a little pulsing, right? That energy is more you than anything else you can see, right? It's more than anything else that you can believe. That energy is you. And that energy, believe it or not, is bliss. It is love and it's happiness. And why do I say that? That life force that is in you, that is you, that life energy has been pulsing through your entire body, your entire life. It has been beating your heart. It has been breathing your lungs. It has fueled your brain, which orchestrates it all. Not just that, that same life force. And remember, you're not plugged into a wall somewhere. I mean, you're plugged into this universe, whatever it is, but we go for 70 years without really ever recharging except for taking a nap, right? Or 8-hour nap, whatever. And so this life force is the same life energy that holds or hangs the earth on nothing. You ever think about that? You ever think about that? Just think about that for a second. We're sitting on a big rock. This big rock is hanging midair in the sky. Midair. There's nothing underneath it. There's nothing. It's just hanging there. It's been hanging there for as long as we know, for billions of years. It's just been hanging, okay? And it's just a rock. And it's a roundish rock, but not really, more like oblong. Not just that, the rock is spinning, okay? It's spinning on its quote unquote axis, okay? Spinning, this oblong rock. And while it spins and hangs in midair, it's revolving around the sun. The sun, by the way, really hot star that we just happen to be far enough away from, okay, to not burn up and just close enough to not freeze, okay? Think about that for a second. Now, whatever it is that hangs this earth on nothing, that rotates it on its axis, revolves it around the sun, lights the sun up, has the sun shine on us at just the right distance to not burn us up or freeze us, that's also in your body, beating your heart, breathing your lungs, and has your brain orchestrating it all, that is more you than the you think is you, okay? So that infinite, eternal, thoughtless, wordless, faceless, formless, life force or energy is love, because all it's done its entire life, quote unquote, is love you. It is taking better care of you than you've taken care of you. It is taking better care of everybody else on the planet, everybody else on every other planet and galaxy than anybody else has. It has figured things out, worked things out, solved things, and set up an entire universe that not one of us or all of us together could ever begin to understand. We're so far away from understanding the most basic laws of the universe, it's unbelievable, right? This power and presence that runs your life, that is your life, that is you, is love, okay? And when you spend time not thinking, and you spend time communing with that presence within you, that peaceful aliveness within you, you experience that life force as the most loving, happy, peaceful energy and experience you've ever had. Okay. And you realize that every other loving experience, peaceful experience, happy experience has really had at its heart this experience of your own presence, your experience of your own presence. All right. And so this third piece, in addition to doing happy things and thinking happy things, or doing things that allow you to feel more love, and then thinking thoughts and telling yourself stories, even if they're not necessarily true in the beginning, fine. But stories that allow you to feel more love, that third piece really is where it's all at. That's where you get the most bang for your buck. And everything else is leading up to that point. Okay. The doing happy things really just leads you up to a place where you finally come to the realization, like, oh, I love this happy stuff. But man, at the end of the day, maybe it's just the conversation that I'm loving. Or maybe it's these other things that I can't quite call them activities, right? And then all of that, just thinking it out and trying to focus on practicing better feeling stories and more positive stories and more positive thoughts, leads you to a place where you're like, man, even that has a level of anxiety in it, right? So if you've been like me and you read as many books you can get your hands on, you have as many conversations with people as you can about love and about peace and about happiness, you do sometimes get to the point where you're like, this is amazing. And now on one hand, I'm scared about thinking something negative because I don't want to attract a negative experience, right? And that's not just law of attraction stuff. That's partly also positive psychology stuff, right? We know that how you feel is attractive, right? That's why happy people tend to attract more and more people, but they also attract more and more opportunities. So real quick, as a side note, for those folks who are interested in the science of happiness, they also found that in order to underscore this point that happiness is attractive, both in your relationships and in other areas of your life, they have found that happy people make more money than unhappy people. They make about $600,000 to $700,000 more on average over the course of their entire lifetime than the unhappy people. Happy people also live longer lives, 6 to 7 years longer than unhappy people. Okay, I already said that they get married earlier, stay married longer, and they're happier in all the relationships than unhappy people. We also know they experience less job burnout, right? They experience more consistent psychological flow, right? That's that moment or time when you feel so dialed in to whatever it is that you're doing that you lose track of time, you lose track of yourself, and you're just putting 60 points up on the scoreboard like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or whoever, right? You can't even explain it really, like it just happens, right? Not just that, but happiness also increases the health that you do experience while you live that longer life, right? And so if there's a master key to success, if there's a lazy shortcut, a lazy intelligent shortcut to living a life of your dreams, including a romantic life, including friendships, including a social life, professional life, it's happiness. And so happiness is the key to success, including relationship success. Presence is the key to happiness, the deep, lasting, meaningful, abiding experience of peace and of happiness and of love that you're wanting, right? Because we've all had the experience of meeting someone in our lives, for instance, and they're amazing and they're wonderful. And then a year later or 2 years later or 10 years later, they found somebody else, or we found somebody else, or right? So clearly the happiness that we're looking for, the love that we're looking for is not in other people. And that doesn't mean they can't enhance our happiness. It doesn't mean they can't enhance the love that we feel. But if we're a beggar and we have no self-love and we feel lonely, and they're a beggar, because most people are, meaning they have no self-love or very low levels of happiness, and you get two beggars together, how could they possibly make each other better off? They only make each other worse off, right? So I'm going to stop there for just a second, but just a real quick review, because I want this really to sink in, okay? Happiness is the key to love. Presence is the key to happiness. Another way of saying that. Love starts with self-love, right? Self-love starts with just enjoying your own company, right? At the end of the day, whether we call it happiness or we call it love, it's just enjoying your own company. We can complicate it, add all kinds of scientific terms around it, but at the end of the day, you have to learn how to enjoy yourself. There's no other way of getting around this, right? We're the one person that we can't divorce. We're the one person we can't separate. We're the one person we can't sue. We're the one person, right? So we hold all the cards. And it takes two to tango, and it takes two to fight. It only takes one to be in love. It only takes one to be happy. And that one is you, right? That one is me. And if you can do it alone, I promise you can easily do it with somebody else, right? Even if they're not doing it with you. And that's the beauty of this whole game, is that I'm all about setting up and rigging the game so that I can win no matter what, right? We all want to win no matter what. I don't want to take, if I could not take any risk and I can win all the house's money, I'm down, not doing anything legal, right? But so the idea is, how can I set up this game so that I win no matter what? And the way you win no matter what is you make falling in love, and I would argue it's rising in love, right? We can call it falling in love. Most of us fall in love, but that's where the problems begin, right? It's not a conscious thing. We literally make the other person our source of love, and we've fallen. They're not our source of love. They can enhance it. They can enjoy us and join us on the journey. But at the end of the day, whether they stay or go, I'm loving me, right? I'm gonna be happy with me. That's guaranteed, So the question then the issue then becomes is, how can I do that? How can I rig the game in a way that does not depend on other people or other things outside of my control, right? And you do that by really falling in love with yourself, right? Really rising in love with yourself. You're rising in love because you're intentionally loving yourself in ways that makes this experience of love unconditional, unshakable, immovable, infinite, and eternal, okay? That's the entire game. Anything short of that, anything that sounds like they don't understand me, they don't get me, they should do something different, the world should look different, for me to feel happy and for me to be in love, is only a hurdle you're placing in your own way that now you have to jump over to get to this love that you've projected into the future and into somebody else or something else, right? So the whole game is, no, stop doing that. Stop putting hurdles in your own way when it comes to an experience and an enjoyment of yourself, right? Now, this self is not a body or mind, and that's where it becomes a little tricky for people, right? Because they say, how can I love myself? I'm 10 pounds overweight, or I'm too small, or I'm too big, or I'm too light, or I'm too dark, or whatever it is. It's all, okay, fair enough, right? We all have this. So it's not about that, right? It's not, we have a body, but we're not a body, right? We have a mind, but we're not a mind, right? We have a vehicle, we're not our vehicle. We never make that mistake. You never hop out of, because I know you all got Range Rovers or Bugattis, whatever it is. You jump out of that car, you never for a second think that you're the car. Not for a second do you mistake yourself for the car, right? You might be upset if the car gets scratched, but you're not like taking it personally. I know sometimes we've all had hoopties and you hate riding around in it, right? But at the end of the day, you don't mistake yourself for the vehicle. In the same way, we want to come around to an understanding and realization that you have a body, but you're not it. You have a mind, but you're not it. You don't have a spirit, you are spirit. You don't have a life, you are life, okay? You don't have a spirit, you are spirit. You don't have a life, you are life. That life, you can feel it in your hands kind of, right? That's the closest thing we get to it, is closer to you, right? Than your own hands and feet. It's closer to you than your own breathing, literally, okay? That's where those expressions from the Bible or other spiritual texts come from, right? God is nearer to you than your own hands and feet, closer to you than your own breathing. What does that mean? The life itself, the life surging through your veins, right? And so I'm going to stop there for a second because I want to take questions. There's lots of other topics we can cover. Just I'll put it out there for a sec. There's some very interesting work being done by John Gottman. And if you ever know of John Gottman, but he's basically, so you might be one of those people that's in a relationship now and maybe you're struggling a little and you're not getting along or whatnot. He's identified what he's called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He can tell you essentially in 30 seconds whether or not your relationship will last with 99% confidence, with 99% reliability, right? Yeah, so the 4 factors, and I'll give it to you real quick: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, okay? So and particularly contempt. So criticism is like, you just feel someone is criticizing you pretty consistently, and it's not just about the behavior. It's not just about the behavior, it's kind of about you. But then it goes beyond that. Contempt is that, but it's about your character. They begin to break down your character, right? So they're attacking your character. That one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse predicts divorce or separation more than anything else they've ever discovered in the world, okay? Which makes a lot of sense, right? Someone attacks who you essentially are, it's probably going to be problematic, right? Probably not going to turn itself around. So there's that one topic. And the other topic is also that I get often is how to deal with difficult people or have difficult conversations, right? Which can be challenging. It's not so challenging if you don't source or route your happiness in the other person. So if you can let them live and you can live, if you give them their freedom and you take your own freedom, take responsibility for how you feel and don't project it onto them, difficult conversations are very easy. Difficult people are very easy because you no longer have an investment in this sinking ship, this Titanic that is them or that is their moods. It's just, okay, you see it that way. God, God bless you. Have a great day. Good for you. Doesn't have to be any pain around it, any reactivity, defensiveness. So I'll stop there for a second. I want to see if there are any questions because I want to be helpful. I only do this to be helpful. I haven't historically loved hearing myself talk. That's just not me. I was voted most shy in my high school class, The worst thing that can happen to a very shy person is to be pointed out or celebrated, I use that word loosely, for being shy. It's the worst thing. So in any case, I'm not here for me. I really genuinely am not. If you leave it up to me, I would not talk at all. Probably just sit and read a book somewhere. But I want to be helpful. So if you guys have questions, reach out. There are a couple of topics I'll cover in addition to what we've talked about so far. But I'll keep checking the chat box here if there are any questions or you just have concerns or you have insights. So real quick, lots of us deal with difficult people. So I want to cover this topic because I know it's going to come in useful. We live in a world full of difficult people. And, sometimes we're those difficult people. And sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with somebody that we love, right? And so I'm going to give you just a real quick, almost formula for how to do it well, right? And so the centerpiece of having a difficult conversation or managing difficult people, the first piece is being peace yourself, okay? It's being peace. No matter what happens in that conversation, you have to, and you want to know and be reminded of, remind yourself and convinced that your peace and your power lies within you and nobody can take that away without your own consent. If you give them consent by projecting your peace and your power into them, well, suddenly, yeah. But the peace and the power I'm talking about is inner, and it's really about being able to find your happiness and your center and your balance again, no matter what anybody does to you or what happens to you, right? That is the first place you start with difficult people and difficult conversations. If you do not start there, I promise it's going to be infinitely more difficult, and the rest of what I say will not be very helpful, okay? So remember, at the end of the day, you're infinitely powerful, literally, right? Okay. So the second step really is listening, okay? And it's listening in a non-judgmental way. So when somebody's expressing themselves, the first thing we want to do is have a knee-jerk reaction, get defensive and reactive. Don't do that. Even if you feel that on the inside, just breathe. And I'm going to teach you a little micro meditation technique a little later, a little bit. But the idea essentially is in that moment, do what you can, okay, to not say a whole lot. Just breathe. Get grounded. And if you're sitting or standing, try to put your feet flat on the ground and just get connected, okay? Then the next thing is when they get to a place or a natural pause, you will simply say to them, you repeat back to them in your own words, what you heard them say. This is like 80% of the game, and most of us don't do this well. So you simply say something like this, all right, crazy. You might not call them crazy though, you just call them by their name. But all right, if I heard you correctly, this is what I heard you say, okay? And you just reflect it back without judgment, exactly what you heard in your own words, okay? And you say, did I hear you correctly? And they might still be upset, saying, that's not it exactly, no, it's this. So they add some stuff, and then you do it again. And at some point, they're not gonna meet any resistance in you. And it is impossible to fight somebody who's not resisting you. You don't have to show up for every fight you're invited to, right? So they're inviting you to a fight, you have to show up, right? And showing up is an inner thing. So you just reflect back. At some point, they'll say, yeah, that's it. And this is when and where all of your power in the conversation really lies. You then simply validate, normalize, and empathize. So it simply sounds like this. Boy, I hear what you're saying, and I can imagine how frustrated you must be or how confusing that is. And if I were in your shoes, if I were you, I know I would feel exactly the way you do. Now, here's the thing about that, because most people say, well, how can I say that with this person who's being so mean or so cruel? And the truth is, what I just shared is a literal truth, not a figurative one. So it's not like just like if I was in my head, but in your body, or no, it's if you were actually that person, if you had their upbringing, their programming, their conditioning, their crazy thoughts, their brain, and their life, you would be saying and doing exactly what they're doing because you'd be them. You'd literally be them. So all you're saying in that statement, even though they'll hear it a little differently, is if I were you, literally, I would be you, literally. Okay, that's like 80% of the game. Okay, you're taking the pin, you're putting the pin back in the grenade, essentially. Okay, and you'd be surprised how often people then will come around to seeing it your way without even trying. They'll soften. They start to soften. At that point, now here's where it gets a little, and this is kind of the end part, positive reframing. Okay, at some point in this conversation, it might not be this conversation, maybe it's the follow-up conversation. You're going to want to do something that's extraordinarily subtle. It's like a graduate level, very artful, skillful approach. But what you're doing essentially is you're now doing what you did earlier, which is you're reflecting back non-judgmentally what you heard, but you're in very soft, small, barely noticeable ways. You're tweaking what they say to point the entire conversation in a much more solution-oriented direction or a much more positive direction, right? So like we did earlier when we said it could either be the loneliest moment of your life or the most oppressed moment of your life, or the opportunity for happiness and love is greater now than ever. That's what you're doing in these conversations. You're beginning to positively frame. You're leading into positive intelligence, which is a real thing. It's called PQ. And you're leading to positive communication by applying this positive reframing technique. But you want to do it so they don't even notice it. Okay, it's got to be so subtle. Go slow. Most of us want to rush in and get them corrected. Don't do that, because that'll ruin everything you just spent so much time and energy doing. Okay, so one quick acronym for doing that well: think. So before you speak, and this is something you want to be practicing anyway, especially with yourselves, and that's before you speak, think. What does think stand for? Before you speak, you ask yourself, can I say what I'm about to say in a way that's just as true, if not more true? That's the T. The H is helpful. How can I say exactly what I want to say right now, but how can I say it in a more helpful way, right? I is inspiring. So part of the challenge and the beauty of all of us caring about happiness is that happiness makes you increasingly charismatic, right? And you can practice putting a little extra icing on that by speaking in increasingly inspiring ways. We can speak in ways that talk about the fear, that talk about the injustice, but we can also speak in a way from that same place of truth in ways that gets people inspired and excited and happy to be alive. And now they want to take action, not for you because you've forced them or motivated them or scared them into doing it, but because they feel so enthusiastic and so enlivened around what this vision is that you're sharing with them, right? So that's the I. The N is necessary, and lots of us stumble here. Brevity is key. So try not to get into the past and dredge up all the stuff they've done wrong or all the experience you've had that have gone wrong. And even if they point them out, try not to spend a lot of time there, because that will keep you stuck in the past. Focusing on the past will keep you stuck in the past, right? Focusing on problems will make you an expert in problems, right? Never in solutions. So only what's necessary. That mostly means focus on the present moment and the future. Focus on the behavior, not the actor themselves. So on the action, not the actor, right? So and focus on it in a desirable way as opposed to an undesirable way. So instead of saying you sucked so bad in the past, you essentially say, I'm so looking forward to and I'm so wanting to support us in this vision that I have, right? For both of us, right? And then the K is kind, which is makes pretty much I think sense for most of us. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there for a sec and check in to see if there's any questions. But the idea there really, if you don't do any of that, honestly, but you just remind yourself and remember at the end of the day that nobody can make you feel anything without your own consent, that it all comes down to your own consent, you won the whole game, okay? And everything else will happen spontaneously from that place. You're like, I don't need, maybe you do yell back, it's fine. But at the end of the day, you can find your center and your balance again, all good. What do we care, right? So let me check in with the questions real quick. Let's see. Deborah says, when you find yourself triggered back into previous patterns of falling for someone else and putting happiness on them, any technique you recommend to bring yourself back to your self-presence while still appreciating what they bring to the table? Yeah, so when you find yourself triggered, falling for someone else and putting happiness on them. Yeah, I'd say a number of things, okay? So first of all, like with most things, practice when it's easy. Don't wait until it's hard to try to execute something you haven't practiced, right? We all do that. It's like, I'm gonna run the marathon. It starts next week. I'm gonna get in shape now. It's like, don't, practice when it's easy, right? So during the day, when nobody's triggering you and when you're not triggered at all and you're just skipping along and it's a beautiful day, that's the time to practice, right? You practice then. So practice when it's easy. That's the first thing. So if you practice when it's easy, it'll be easy when it's supposed to be difficult. Okay, that's the first thing, the most important technique. Okay. Second thing is this. I share a lot of information. You guys are probably big readers. You listen to a lot of videos. You're clearly lifelong learners and students. You only really need one principle or practice that you consistently apply, and it will take you all the way home. All the way home. Any one principle. You don't need 1,000 principles. In fact, I would discourage you from trying to apply too many things at once. A lot of goal theory has found that if you have more than 2 goals at any one time, your likelihood of accomplishing them goes down with each additional goal you add, right? So if you have 3 goals, okay, so if you have 1 goal, you're going to probably achieve the 1 goal. It's like, I think 0.9% or something like that. If you have 2 goals, you're probably going to achieve a goal and a half. If you have 3 goals, it starts to go even further back. It's like you might achieve a goal and a quarter. Like, so you want to stick to no more than 3 goals at any point in time. But I would say the same thing goes for principles. Stick to one principle long enough that you've mastered it, and then move on to the next one. Okay. Otherwise, you'll spread yourself too thin. Right. And so that's the second piece I want to make, but more back to the triggering piece. So you pick one of these things I'm going to share with you. Okay. So I would say that the first thing is distraction. Okay. One of the best things you could possibly do when you're feeling a lot of negative emotion, and whether it's loneliness or depression or sadness, no matter what it is, okay, is to distract yourself. The happiness islands I talked about earlier, the love islands I talked about earlier, are so valuable because they give you something that you have recorded or documented before you're feeling triggered that you can instantly go to, and it takes a little effort because you normally don't want to apply the things you most need to apply when you're feeling bad. Like, it's so counterintuitive. You're like, I don't want to go for a walk now. Now's the time for me to yell at that person. But that's exactly what you need not to do. You need to go for the walk, right? So the happiness islands or love islands list, you go to and you say, this is one of the happiness activities that I love, or one of the things that makes me feel uplifted. And even though I don't think it'll work right now, I'm still going to do it, right? So distraction, you can use the happiness islands list or the love islands list. Or I had a client, and this client was amazing because he didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any French. And he came to me, and all I could understand after about two sessions was that he was sad and he didn't want to be sad. That's all I got, man. And like, so at some point we talked, and I just kept doing this, and because I was trying to encourage him to wear a rubber band. So I see this guy 6 months after that. He runs this restaurant, and he says, you know, all I can understand he'd say is, it worked, no more sad, you know. And what he said essentially was that he used a pattern interrupt, right? So a distraction you can think of as a pattern interrupt. A pattern interrupt is anything that gets your mind off of that well-worn, well-traveled groove in your brain that sends you spiraling, or that sends you falling for some or whatever. He would snap the rubber band and in his head just say no, and immediately change the focus of his attention, okay? One way that therapists will often recommend you do that is just look in the room that you're in and start calling out objects to yourself if you're surrounded by people, because they might think you're crazy. But if you're alone, you can do it out loud, and you just stove, rug, floor, ceiling, lights, laptop. You know, you just do about 20 items. But distraction, okay, it's critical. Distraction is critical. If you only genuinely want to feel good, if you want to be happy, honestly, that one sole desire, if you want it more than anything else, would show you how to do all of this, okay? So I'm not sharing anything special, all that special here, but the one thing I want to remind us all of is that desire will take you all the way home. If you want to be happy more than you want anything else in the world, you will be happy. If you want peace more than you want anything else in the world, you will find peace. And if you want love more than anything else, you will have love, right? There's no question about that. And it's something interesting that's built into, like, I guess, the human spirit that just leads you there in a really fast way. And part of the secret for me was that this happiness thing and this getting over the loneliness thing was life and death, right? The suicide thing made it life and death. I said, I'm either going to live as blissfully as humanly possible, or I'm not going to live. I was that serious about it at the time. And because I was that serious, I put all my heart, you know, blood, sweat, and tears into it, you know, and you get good at things very quickly when it literally feels like you're either going to die or live. That's what it felt like to me, you know? So, and then, so Bruce Lee would say it this way. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the one who has practiced one kick 10,000 times, right? So be that guy, be that woman that practices that one kick 10,000 times. You'll be lethal with it, right? You want to be lethal with it. Okay, so I hope that answers the question a little bit. So practice when it's easy, and then have this little list of distractions or happiness islands, love islands. Pick 1 or 2 that are go-tos, and then go to them. If you can't do any of that because you're trapped in a physical setting that you can't escape from or whatnot, then just begin to find things in the room that you can love or appreciate, or just notice objective things. They don't have to be or carry a whole lot of meaning, right? So I would say those are the most important things. It'll get easy and easier with practice. I promise, okay? So it's always hardest in the beginning. Don't give up, and you're gonna feel and notice that or think that it's not working. That's always the trap, is you're like, oh, this isn't working. Give it time, you know? Like, And if you don't feel like it on certain days and you just feel better off taking a nap is one of the best ways to get back to a place of emotional neutrality again, right? Just take a nap, like seriously. All right. See if there's anything else I hear I missed. Agata says, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's so inspiring. I've been on antidepressants on and off now. I would love to finally leave antidepressant or live antidepressant free. What would you recommend? Okay, so sorry I missed that one. I should have gotten to that one first. The antidepressants, it's interesting because when I was going through what I was going through in terms of depression, I thought the only thing that could save me was antidepressants. I was convinced that I had a neurological or a biological or a biochemical or neurochemical imbalance. I was convinced of it. I mean, I'm telling you, I was convinced. There's nobody who was more convinced than me. I was like, the only thing that's going to fix this is drugs, and drugs have a great purpose, and they can help us to cross this bridge that sometimes seems uncrossable in our lives, which is from depression, even suicidal ideation, to a place where you can then begin to actually take action. Because the challenge with depression is that you often feel a lack of motivation. You think nothing will work, right? Remember, it's learned helplessness that leads to depression, right? So learned helplessness is like you've tried to do things in your life, but you're not getting the effect or the outcome you want. And so you begin to give up and you begin to become hopeless, right? So you learn hopelessness, so you learn helplessness, and it leads to depression. So I was very lucky, though I will say this, I felt unlucky because I didn't want to ask for antidepressants or even go seek any professional help because I was afraid I was going to get fired from my job, and then I'd have to hear about it from my parents, and it was a whole cycle of things. They wouldn't have done that, I'm sure, but I was just so afraid of all these other repercussions. And I also didn't want people to know that I was depressed and suicidal. It was embarrassing to me on some level. So I never got access. And what I discovered was that, thank God I didn't, because if I had, I may very well have become completely addicted to them and had never discovered any maybe real happiness. Who knows? Maybe I would have had a different path. But yes, I can, in other words, I resonate with you wanting to be antidepressant free. I would strongly recommend continuing the antidepressants for now until you get a really strong recommendation from a doctor, right? From a psychiatrist. I would go further than that and say probably a psychologist, sometimes psychiatrist. And I love my psychiatrist friends, but sometimes they're a little invested in you staying on psychiatric drugs for good reason, right? So, or for understandable reason, I should say. So that being said, you want to do what you need to do around the antidepressants. You want to really taper off of them in a way that is accompanied by professional help. But, and most importantly, all antidepressants should be accompanied at all times with cognitive behavioral therapy. And I personally prefer mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And if not that, at least dialectical therapy, right? So dialectical therapy is really about acceptance and change, and cognitive behavioral therapy is mostly about reframing things. But strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you do that if you have interest in that. You don't need to do it that way. At the very least, begin applying some of the principles and topics and techniques that we discussed today. Like, start just simply doing happier things and carve out more time for happier things. Make happiness the most important thing in your life, man. Nothing else matters. Like, we might literally be dead in 5 minutes, in 50 minutes, in 50 years. It doesn't matter, but we will be dead. And we're only here for a weekend. And you want to juice and just milk every moment you can for as much happiness and peace and love you can possibly get. And don't make it depend on anybody or anything else. Just take responsibility. And by that, I mean the ability to respond. Okay, there's not any judgment in that. It's not a moral, ethical thing. I want you to be selfish about it. And I want you to realize and recognize that there are things that you can do. And that if you keep doing them, all of a sudden you wake up one day, you've hit a tipping point, and you're like, wow, like I thought seriously I could never recover from this, but I just kept going even when I didn't want to. So consume as much information on happiness or love, if the challenge is around loneliness, as you possibly can. There are people that are much wiser than me, spent even more time than me, that have dedicated their blood, sweat, and tears, their mind, heart, and soul to one thing. Like, I can't do anything. I can't tie my shoes. I can barely cook a meal. None of that stuff, man. I can't do any of it, but I can do this one thing because it's the only thing I focus my entire life on. It's the only thing I genuinely care about. I want to see people happy. It's kind of crazy that we live till 70 and most of us die at 30. Sometimes these days we die on the inside at 20 or 25 years old, right? You don't need to do that. And so I just want to encourage you, there's hope. Drown yourself in positive material. Like, listen all day if it's on YouTube or videos or audiobooks. It doesn't matter when and where. Even if you don't feel like it, just put it on and leave it on the background. Because if you're left to your own thoughts when you're already experiencing chronic depression or loneliness or anxiety or sadness, if you're left to your own device, your own thoughts, you're just going to continue to replay the same old record over and over and over again. So you need somebody else to kind of get in there for you or with you to help you turn or change this record to one that's much more supportive and uplifting. Okay. Awesome. So see if I see any more questions here. This one just popped up. I won't mention because it was a private message, but it said, I've really started to feel some benefits from your suggestions and thoughts. Question, how can you help give or inspire happiness in others around you who seem trapped in their negativity? I see loved ones in a cycle of negativity, and I want to share the happiness I've been gaining with them. Okay, this is such a great question. So I'm going to keep it real simple, okay? To help, you have to be beyond help. You have to be beyond needing the help, okay? I know that sounds, and I know I can feel very strongly that you are beyond the need for help. You have to stay rooted and grounded in that, okay? Part of the challenge, and I know this from being on the other side, part of the challenge with most of us is that we get lost or we begin to drown in the other person's problems, and we begin to drown in their pain. And if you're an empath, like probably so many of you are, probably all of you, you're an empath like me, you will quickly find yourself drowning in other people's pain and other people's problems. You want to sympathize and empathize, more than that, really have compassion with the person, but not with their pain. If you spend a lot of time, right, there's a big difference there. So you meet them with the words that let them feel understood and feel heard, right? But on the inside, deep on the inside, you have got to know and feel deeply that this is an infinite, eternal, faceless, formless, spiritual being that sits across from you, that sits with you, that essentially really sits within you. Okay? So this, everything that they're giving you, the thoughts, the words, the energy, you have to be able to see beyond that and see the Christ in them, see the Buddha in them. Okay, that doesn't mean you actually physically see something. It means that you feel that peacefully alive presence within you. You focus your attention, your energy there, and you turn that bad boy up like a dimmer switch until you're just lit up. You stay lit up inside as you connect with them, right? So you meet them with the words. You're careful about the ways in which you express things. You're not going to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be alive," while they're sitting there crying, right? You meet them with the words, but on the inside, you're staying lit up, right? You have to stay lit up because you want them to catch fire. You want them to get lit, right? So you got to stay lit up. So that means you cannot buy in fully to their problems. You can't. If you buy into the problems, you're both lost. Okay, so you sympathize with the person, not with their pain. You stay in peace and in love and in happiness. You stay connected to source and to God or life or the universe or whatever you want to call it. That is where it's at. It's there. Okay, and then you suddenly, sometimes, when you're in the state of presence, in the state of stillness and silence on the inside, and your mind is quiet, by the way. Okay, the only way you feel, you're thinking less, feeling more. You're not thinking at all. You're feeling complete. You're just feeling. It's a feeling thing, right? So you're staying rooted and planted in presence. Okay. And then occasionally you might find yourself inspired to say certain things or do certain things, but you want to make sure it's inspired in spirit, in presence. Okay. It's coming from presence. It's coming through you, not from you, right? It's coming through you, not from you. If it's coming from you, right? It's not, you can, yes, use your words, more powerfully use your presence. Okay. And so the most important thing you can possibly do is not tell them what they need to do or tell them what they should do, but be what they want to be. Be what they're not being. Okay. They have enough pain. They don't need your pain too. They've got enough suffering. They don't need your suffering too. To help, you've got to be beyond help, right? To help someone who's drowning, you got to be beyond drowning, right? So you got to be rooted and planted and grounded in God, or planted in presence, or whatever word you want to use. But it's a thoughtless, wordless place of knowing that whatever happens, someone can come. There's a story of a Bodhidharma, okay? And there was a serial killer, okay? So the serial killer would go through the forest and he was just basically killing people, okay? And Bodhidharma was an enlightened being. So the serial killer gets up to Bodhidharma and he, says, "You know who I am? I'm basically serial killer. I'm like Jack the Ripper, So he shows up and Bodhidharma just looks at him, he's unfazed, and he said, "Didn't you hear me? I'm a serial killer. I'm this, and Bodhidharma just looks at him, and he says, don't you know who I am? He says, "Don't you know who I am? I could cut your head off without even blinking, without even thinking about it." And Bodhidharma looked at him and says, "Don't you know who I am? I could have you cut my head off without even thinking about it." Right? So it doesn't mean that you don't fight, that you don't preserve your life, but it means at the end of the day, you're not convinced that you're a body. You're not convinced that you're a mind. You're not buying into the fact this other person is a body or mind. Yeah, you're going to do what you can to protect them, to feed them, to give them what they need, okay, in the best way that you can without compromising your own well-being, okay? That's big because love is not sacrifice, right? You don't give because you're, you know, it's a different giving. It's a giving without strings attached, right? So at the end of the day, though, it's presence that speaks, right? Silence speaks, stillness speaks, right? The words are secondary. The words are like the grandchildren of silence and stillness and presence. They're the grandchildren. So the grandchildren can be that powerful. Imagine what the grandfather can be, right? So powerful, right? So hope that was helpful. Let's see if I missed anything else there. Yeah, so, okay, so a little bit more practical steps. So first of all, do that, be an active listener, listen without judgment, hold unconditional regard. The one thing we know about the most transformative element in any relationship, including therapeutic relationships, unconditional regard, unconditional love. So that's the other way of saying it. Just be unconditional love. Don't try to get and fix right away. Try to understand. Okay, seek first to understand. Don't try to fix, change. Don't do any of that, because that sometimes will push, you don't know. Sometimes that will push people in all the direction, right? Especially if it's not coming from a place of true and deep presence. And then if and when they want help, then help support them in that, and just let them know that you're there for them. You want to support them. You see them as being happy. You recognize their gifts and their strengths, sometimes pointing that out and also backing it up with evidence and saying, oh my gosh, one thing I love about you is no matter how bad things get, I see your heart and I see how hard you're trying. And let me tell you something I saw yesterday when you did X, Y, and Z, and that inspired me. So I don't know if you know that, right? The other thing is, and then I'll move on, is action, is helping them to help other people. So sometimes we say, when you're really struggling, help somebody else. But if you want to learn something, teach it. The fastest, best way to learn something is to teach it. You learn it better than ever, first of all. But second of all, it gets you outside of yourself, right? So if you're really struggling with an issue like loneliness, do what you can and get out there. Go join a hotline or something that lets you talk to people who are feeling lonely. And you'd be surprised at how quickly that gets you out of your own loneliness. It's mind-blowing in a way, that by teaching something you don't even know that well, or maybe at all, or feel like you know it all, you suddenly get really good with the loneliness. Next thing you know, you're not lonely anymore, right? So that's also scientifically found evidence of that. So yeah, those are a couple quick thoughts. See if there's anything else. Nikki says, best thing you've said to me lately is the reminder that not being in control is in your best interest. Yes, your best thinking got you here. So they'd say that in the AA a lot. I used to work as a spiritual counselor in a rehab place, and one of the expressions we'd always say is, they'd say, I think that this or that. And we always say, remember, brother, sister, I love you so much. And your best thinking got you here into rehab, okay? And so thinking is overrated, right? Thinking is a little bit overrated, and control is overrated, right? So if you think about it, we all want more and more control of our love lives and our happiness and our money, and that's great, and we understand that, okay? It's a healthy thing. And that being said, at the end of the day, we're stardust in a rotting corpse on a rock, spinning, rotating, revolving around the sun, a super hot star, right? So like, put it in perspective, right? So exercise little control tweaks here and there, but don't get crazy, and be happy and excited that there's something that's way smarter than this human intellect that's in control of your life. And there's a huge weight that's lifted off your shoulders when you realize that, right? Let's see if there's anything else here, and then I'll let you guys go. This was, as I try to vice grip things, I love that. When I feel out of control, I'm learning to let go and let flow. There you go. Look at you, poet, and you know it. Practice, practice, practice. So yeah, so at the end of the day, my friends, I'll just say this, kind of wrap it up. And you guys, by the way, are welcome to reach out to me through Instagram. I'm at Rob Mack Official, Facebook, Twitter, same deal. I want to give a huge shout out to Omstars for having me on and letting me do this. But I genuinely do this work because I love helping people. There's no other incentive in this for me, and I mean that, okay? I used to give my coaching services away for like the first 5 or 6 years, and then I was essentially homeless, and so I started charging, but, so please know I live to be helpful. So I'll just say this to finish, okay? Happiness is not what you think, okay? It's no thing you think, okay? So it's nothing in the world, it's nothing you think. So it's nothing you think in the world, but it's also nothing you think in your head, right? So it's no object, it's no person, it's no place, but it's also no thought. Okay, it's nothing that's fleeting. If it's fleeting, don't invest your happiness in it. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Enjoy it all day, but just don't invest this happiness in there. Don't go looking for your happiness in something that's fleeting or changing. Okay. Same thing is true of love. Okay, love is not what you think. Okay, love is no thing. Right, it's no thing. And love is also not to be found in anybody, right? It's not to be found in any body, right? Love essentially is spirit. It's your spirit. It's my spirit. It's presence itself. It is something that is immovable, unshakable. It is actually the naked awareness of your very own existence. Okay, it's your own blind being. Essentially, it's the thoughtless, wordless experience of simply being alive. It's that undiluted, unedited, unfiltered experience of simply being alive. Okay, when you're alive and you don't overthink it, it's an extraordinary life, right? It's an extraordinary life if you don't think too much about it. Right? You're experiencing love already if you don't think up so much about it. All you are is experiencing life. All life has done to you and for you is loved you. That's it. Existence loves you so much that it gave of itself and continues to give of itself and has done so since the day you were born. And it did the same thing for your parents and their parents and their parents' parents. It's done nothing but love you. And that doesn't mean that we don't have difficult times. It doesn't mean that we don't suffer sometimes, okay? But ultimately, this stream of well-being, this stream and source of love is so infinite and so eternal and so immovable and so unshakable that you can't get it wrong, right? The only thing you ever get wrong is you think yourself out of it, right? And so as hard as we try to think our way into love. Not possible. You are the source of love. You can only think your way out of love. You can never think your way into it. So if you're not feeling loved and you're feeling lonely or unhappy, stop thinking. Don't think more. Stop thinking, okay? More thinking won't get you there, right? Going faster in the wrong direction will not help. All right, so I love you guys so much. Reach out if you have questions, comments, concerns. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. I trust that you will, but reach out anytime, okay? Bye, guys.